So, wow, that's a big wow for us. You have no idea the level of excitement I'm in right in. It's especially because my wife, I think my wife is here for the first time. I'm speaking on an international conference on stage. Where is Mo? Woo! So, I'm Eliran. I'm going to keynote this conference today, and thank you for being amazing and joining us today. I'm going to cover everything, not everything, but the highlights of version 19, because we have plenty to talk about, and it's going to be pretty much challenging to touch everything there. About myself, I'm Eliran. I'm the founder and CEO of eSquare, a consulting firm. I will touch it in a second. I'm a Google developer expert for Angular and web technologies, and the main organizer of Angular TLV, this amazing community that gathers every a few weeks for an amazing meetups, and this amazing yearly conference that this is the first edition of it. We plan to do it years and years out, so thanks for your support once again. I mentioned eSquare. eSquare is a consulting firm doing mainly Angular, European top-notch startup choice, working with plenty of Israeli companies, but also European ones, from architecture consulting to staff augmentation and workshops and trainings. We also lead the Angular community in Israel. If you're curious about that, catch me during one of the breaks. We'll love to tell you more about that. Of course, we hiring, so even though you have amazing companies who sent you to this conference, just in case, this is the email, or catch me during one of the breaks. I've mentioned the community. You have an Adir also mentioned that during the MC welcome. I have to admit, it's amazed me over and over again to see you guys joining the monthly meetups. We have, in average, more than 200 people registering to a meetup and more than 100 people in-person attendees, which is crazy comparing to communities around the world. This is just because of your addiction to Angular, and this is amazing. Thanks again for you. You deserve a round of applause. So, we're going to have a packed agenda today. It's starting from v19 features, a lot of improvements, some reactivity, new APIs like link signal, resource, and after render effect. But not only, we also, of course, SSR and material updates, but not only, we're going to have a sneak peek into the future of Angular, what we're going to update, and how Angular going to look like in the next couple of years. Now, you know what? I will start with the end product, and the thing is, Angular is growing. There is so much going on with Angular the last 3 years. From Ivy, if you ask me, the Ivy was the pivot point where Angular changed and became a framework delivering fast. Now, we see the satisfaction rate in Google increased in 20%. We see the satisfaction rate in the communities 85%. But if you ask me, the most important thing is that people outside of Angular, of the Angular community, are more interested in Angular, which means Angular is growing, which means it's a great time to be an Angular developer. And you know what? v19 was a great example for that, because you saw Minko Getche blog? Everybody seen that? 18 minutes of read. It's crazy. A lot of features coming out in once 6 months release. It's a crazy thing. A lot of new stuff happening in Angular. And I will start with Reactivity. So Angular had a problem. And the problem was Zone.js, which was causing DOM inefficient checks for every action that was happening, or every event was happening in the application. And the goal and promise came from the Angular team was to move into a reactive framework based on signals that will lead the way into zoneless application. Now, today, we're really close to that point because we already have this experimental flag, provide experimental zoneless change detection that we're going to see in a second in a live demo. But it's not only that. we have signals. The stories of signals started with these three reactive primitives. And as Mark mentioned, right now, Angular completed the way of wiring Angular into the signals mechanism. Inputs, outputs, and all the queries are already now stable in v19. And it's not only that, they are part of the reactive graph. We're going to improve the type-safe checking, and for sure will simplify the API. One of the questions you might ask, we are not new to Angular. We're working from Angular since version 2 maybe, or for the last couple of years. You really want me, I have a huge application already, you really want me to start and migrating one by one. So the Angular team created migration script that in Google successfully migrated around 90% of the inputs, queries, and outputs automatically. And this happened with simple commands that you can use and run manually, and it will probably help you making this migration smoothly. Now, let's talk about these four new signals API. We have the link signal, the resource, the Rx resource, and the after render effect. And before that, we will see them in the demo in a second, okay? But before that, I want to touch on the problem, why we needed a new APIs in signals. And it's, it started with this video. Somebody saw this video? Just a few. Alex Rickenbauer was interviewing in Tech Stack Nation, a podcast of one of the leaders in the Angular community. And the topic was, don't use effects. I saw a tweet by Ben Lesh saying, don't use effect. And you see more and more people in the Angular community saying, don't use effect. And you probably asking yourself, hey, effect is one of the key fundamentals of signals. Why can't I use it? What's the problem with effect? And the main problem with effect is when you're trying to achieve something which is, effect might not be the right key to help you with. And who's here read the doc of Angular signals? A few, great. Because this is exactly the way I'm getting more and more customers keep not reading the docs. This written in the doc, when not to use signals. The problem with, when not to use effects. The problem with effects is when you're trying to propagate state of a component, a specific component, it can result in expression change after it's been checked error. And the main problem is effects are part of JavaScript microtasks that you not really control. You don't know when exactly the timing of the effect going to be invoked. And if you're trying to create sort of a sync between two reactive systems, okay, Dennis. If you're trying to create a sync between two reactive systems and sync your state, that can cause you a lot of problems because you can't know when this effect will run. And change detection might run before that, means that your UI is not going to be consistent with your actual state. So if I'm trying to summarize it, effects are the way to sync between the reactive system and the non-reactive world. Let's see the demo. Before that, let's explain what we're going to build. So we're going to build together an application where we have three main components. The first one, we have three columns. The first one shows a list of users coming from an API. The second one showing posts of each user. And the third one will show the comments related to specific post I selected, the select post. Okay? So the application is pretty much, you can see it, right? Amazing. So the application is pretty much built, but with some additions we need to create. So we have three DAM components. We have app components, which is going to be the container components, doing the HTTP requests. And we have three DAM components for users, for posts, and for a specific post with the comments. Now, we actually don't have anything under the hood, just the basic parameters that we're going to fill in a second. And if we take a look on users, for example, you will see that it's just a DAM component, getting everything with using already the input on model functions that are part of the new Signals API. Now, let's start implementing it. So the first thing I need to do is I have a component, I want to fetch the users. First thing came to mind is maybe, let's add a constructor. Never mind. And inside the constructor, we can take the users. Everybody can see it, or should I increase it a little bit? Better? Cool. So the users, and also we have a service API, we have a post service. Where's the post service? Thanks. Where the post service actually just invoke using the Angular HTTP client and invoking 3 different HTTP requests, one for users, one getting a user ID and getting his post, and the other one, the third one, getting a post ID and returning a list of the comments. Now let's use the service to so we can get post service, get users. We pretty much set. The only problem is users is a signal and post service return observable. What's going to be the best way to convert it? To signal. So I can just change it to be to signal, and we can see that we already have list of users. Amazing. Now I need, whenever I'm selecting a specific user, to load his posts, right? Wait a second, it's weird. It's already running? Of course not. Yeah, now we see it. And whenever we select a user, we want to show the related post. So I can take this post, but I want to be subscribing to selected user. And I have this one. So you might think that effect can be a good tool to use. Whenever we have const selected user, it's going to be this selected user. Just run the function. We see that the type is user or undefined. Here, we can check if we have a selected user. We want, first of all, loading post to set it to true. So we get the loading indicator. And here, this post service dot get post with selected user ID. If I will subscribe to it, we'll get a list of posts, take my post and set it with post, and of course, loading post set to false. So far, let's see if it works. Great. So we have a loader. You see the loading spinner and the list of posts. Next, the same thing we can do to wire we can do the same thing to wire the comment section. So I will quickly copy this one, selected post, which we're going to be selected post. If I have a selected post, I want to set the loading comments indicator to true, get comments, change it to selected post ID, subscribe to it. I know that I'm going to get comments here, and set the comment section and also the indicator, loading indicator, loading to false. Amazing. So we have a working application, and we tend to think that we're done and everything works here until somebody will open a bug. The QA team probably going to open a bug, because when I'm clicking on one of the users, I still see the oldest post. And this is not the expected result. So some of you might think we can solve it with another effect that can just subscribe into the selected user, and whenever selected user is changing, to take the selected post and set it to undefined. And basically that can work, but also can't work in some times. You can't guarantee, there is no guarantee that this one going to be working 100% of the time because of the timing problem we had with effect. We're trying to sync two reactive states. When you're setting a signal inside an effect, this is the red flag that should raise for you and tell you that you have a problem. And the way of dealing with that can be two things. First of all, we saw in the docs that the approach that the Angular team telling us is always prefer to use computed when you have something like that. The problem with computed, let's remove this one, and let's change the selected post to be a computed. So selected post will be a computed function that it's going to be a computed function that whenever this selected user is updated, I want to return undefined. And even if I'm going to change the type here to be more declared, and I'm going to tell that it's going to be type of signal of undefined or post, I'm going to have a problem. And the problem is that the type here is signal and not writable signal. In most of the time, I want to update selected post from my container component. So to the rescue, the new API, link signal. Now, let's change this to be equal to a link signal. And link signal have two things. First is the source. So inside the source, we're saying who's the related signal that I'm binding to, which is selected user in this case. And the other one is the computation function. The computation function in our case just return undefined. Now, we have to type it, because otherwise it will think that it's always writable signal of undefined. Let's just say that the type is post on undefined, and we're all set. Now, we have another problem with effects. We mentioned the problem with effect and timing. What about asynchronous functions? We mentioned that we want to use effect as a synchronous way to sync between the reactive world and the non-reactive world. Here we're taking the reactive world and trying to add asynchronous functions like HTTP request, which going to cause a lot of problems. So also here, the core team invented a new API called resource. And because we're working with observable, I will show the RX way of doing stuff with RX resource. We have resource and RX resource. We're going to demonstrate them both. So RX resource have a function that inside we can just pass a loader. Let's remove the type. So users, loader, going to be just this service.getUsers. And you see that the type is resource ref of user array. In a second, we will see what we can do with the resource ref. Let's change the same for post and for comments. So post, instead of being just a signal of post array, because it's coming from an HTTP request, I will override it to be an RX resource of, here is a tricky one, because we actually need another parameter to invoke this HTTP request, right? So here we have another property called request. Request means what's the pre-requirement you need to invoke this request. I know the naming is not the best thing that the core team could think of. By the way, there is an open RFC. If you don't like the name, you can always comment on GitHub and tell them what do you think about that. And it might change. Again, in v19, it's just still in developer's preview. So request actually can tell the function what exactly I need in order to invoke the request. So we know that we need the selected user. And inside the loader, I have this, this function that first of all can get the request. Let's change its name. So I'm going to destruct the object request and call it selected user. So it's going to be a little bit more understandable what I'm doing. Now, if I have a selected user, let's go to the service, post service, and invoke the get post function with the selected user.id. And otherwise, we need to return an observable of an empty array. Cool? We can do the same thing to comments, but this time let's not use the Rx one. By the way, one of the ideas behind supporting the resource API was for application who doesn't want to work with RxJS. This is something that's now doable. So I'm going to overwrite comments, and let's here just use the resource API. Resource API going to look like more or less the same. So we have request here. And inside the request, I want to use the selected post. And in the loader, again, I want to destruct the request. Let's rename it to be selected post. Now, if I have a selected post, I can just use the fetch API. We don't need the Angular HTTP client anymore. So let's quickly go to the service. There's the service class to take the API from here. So we need the base API and also the, we need this one. Cool. So, and of course, it's going to be selected post.id. And otherwise, we want to return promise.resolve of an empty array. Here, fetch API return a promise-like. So we have to then response and response.json. Cool, let's break it to few rows so everybody can see it. Selected post, fetch API, no RxJS needed. Now, you might think that we're done and everything works, but not exactly because we break the HTML. Let's go to our app component once again, and we see that users was expecting to get a signal. Post was expected to get also a post. By the way, let's remove everything we have inside the constructor because we don't need it anymore. Cool. And here we can take the users, but we have on the Rx resource something that's called value. If I will use the value on each of them, I'm pretty much good to go. Works. What's missing? The loading. So basically, we were setting it inside the effect, right? Now, instead, we can just take the resource itself, and resource have a state on it. So I can change here to post loading. I can change here to comments is loading. and amazing. This is when you clap. One last thing. If we go to our app config file, we're currently using Zone.js, but we said we have signals, we don't need Zone.js anymore. Let's remove Zone.js and provide experimental zoneless change detection. With that, I have to go to Angular JSON file, also mark here Zone.js, remove it. And when I'm doing something like that, I have to rerun the application. Once it's going to finish building, you can see that even that the application is completely zoneless, everything works smoothly. All right. Wait. Cool. So we talked about this API. Actually, I don't have a lot of time, so I think I'm going to skip the after render effect demo. After render effect, just imagine the moment when you have, exactly like we have the after viewing neat lifecycle. Imagine that with signals, sometimes, I will share the slides later so you can see the demo because I have plenty to talk about and I don't want to stack the entire schedule for today. After render effect, exactly like after viewing neat lifecycle look, just imagine that you need to run some effect, but you're not sure that the DOM finished rendering. You have this example where I'm actually creating an input, and whenever I'm clicking on the button, the input is appearing, and only then I can focus on it. I will share it later with you guys, or in the next meetup, I promise. Now, let's set one expectation for all of us. Whenever you see this slide, remember, it's still part of the future, things that the Angular team is working in the lab. I hope I have the permissions to share this kind of stuff outside of this closed group. But we're in a conference. This is our first edition. Let's do that. But the most important thing is to remember this kind of stuff might take a lot of time to arrive and might not happen. It's still in the lab, and it might take a lot of time. And with that said, let's have a look at the future. What about forms? Signal forms, right. So the idea, and there is a prototype already that the Angular team is working on right now, there is an idea to change the signals, the form-based one that we have right now to a signal-based, unified. So we're not going to have one reactive and one template form. We're going to have only one signal one. And the goal is to make things more flexible and more easy to use. This is how it's going to look like. Now, don't worry, I will share the slides later. The idea behind it is to have a if you have complex validation to move them into computed signals. Whenever we have a computation, a composition of nested form, that definitely will make things more easier because we don't need to make this weird thing with form control names. And of course, whenever we're customizing our own form controls, it will be more easier. Just imagine saying goodbye to the good old control value accessor. So that's the idea. There is also an idea to move things into signal-based route, where it's going to be, the router going to take more charge into the data fetching, while the rendering becomes more synchronous, means that the resource API is going to be the glue that's going to tie them all together. Again, it's still in the lab, things that we might start to see maybe in the next version or the one next to it. But good to know that the team is working on this kind of stuff. SSR, who's familiar with Wiz? Yeah, Wiz. For us, for Israelis, Wiz is this weird unicorn startup, right? The one that refused the Google acquisition offer for how much was it? 20 billion or something like that. So apparently Google already have a Wiz inside Google, and Wiz is a performance-based framework that the Angular team using for the Google search, for example. So Google search built with Wiz, as I said, excellent with server-side rendering and optimized for lazy load coding. Now, the Angular team and Wiz was tied again and become one big team, which going to cooperate together in a long-term relationship. And there is already stuff that's happening under the hood that you're asking yourself what we're getting out of it. So, for example, Wiz already using the Angular signals implementation, while Angular took the with event reply that Mark also mentioned, that's going to improve Angular SSR abilities pretty much dramatically. Also, the incremental iteration is a new concept coming to Angular, where the defer block is the foundation for that. Now you have an ability to iterate a specific component with a defer block on a specific trigger. I will encourage you to attend Idan's talk, another amazing developer from eSquare, about SSR and hydration. What's coming? It's coming up later today, 12:15, if we're going to make it in time for the schedule. And of course, Ran Rosman, also going to be here today talking about the deferrable views. If you are not familiar with that concept, which is an amazing concept you probably want to get familiar with. Authoring format, and I'm going to finish with that, because I'm really running out of time, but it's a super important thing that we seen as part of the I was in NG Poland Conf 3 weeks ago, and Alex Rickabow shared some of the thoughts, and then a lot of people saw some new stuff coming in Twitter and was panicked about a little bit. So I wanted to give the bigger picture and explain why it's happening. First of all, let's talk about what we have today. So there is a lot of unnecessary complexity behind the platform, a lot of multiple approaches to the same problem, and some spatial rules that we need to remember as Angular developers in order to do some stuff. And in terms of templates and components, the Angular team was providing a few updates the last couple of versions. In v14, we had the standalone. In v17, the control flows, which changed Angular dramatically in terms of performance, and of course, the defer block. And in v18, we had the new let operator in the template. Now, the Angular team working on 3 new stuff: selectorless templates, TypeScript in binding, and lexical scope. And I want to touch them one by one real quick to explain why they need it and what's the big hype around it, and why you see this scary slide of what's going to change in Angular in the next couple of versions. Let's quickly go to selector templates. So the current version is that we have standalone components, and now it's by default. Every new project that you're going to start with Angular will be already come with the standalone approach, and it helps us reference only what we need. On the other end, we create components like that, right? We create a component, the upper component, user avatar, and then we use this selector. We have some problem with it. We have actually 4 problems with it. The imports are double. We need to double import it. We have 2 names. One is the selector and one is the class name. Selectors are not really CSS, and we don't really know which one is a directive and which one is a selector. Now, standalone can help us actually refer only what we use. Just imagine that this code will become this code. Looks familiar? Somebody said React? Yeah, so it's not JSX, but it looks familiar. And actually, the concept's coming from other frameworks, which it's pretty much cool, if you ask me, because it makes a lot of sense in Angular. Now, what about directives? So directives, in JavaScript, you already have decorated directives that the Angular can adopt. Expressions, who's doing that? Or try to do that? You can't really cast something inside your template, right? What's the problem? Why not? It's not TypeScript. Expression in Angular templates are not TypeScript. They are a spatial thing Angular built under the hood. And there is if you check the date, it's from 2021, September 21. Pete Bacon, which is not in the team anymore, there is an issue, open issue. Angular expression should be plain TypeScript expression. This might solve a lot of developers' problem with the templates. This maybe cause us some issues with pipes, but on the other hand, because this operator is a TypeScript operator, and there is a JavaScript stage 2 proposal to adopt pipeline operators to the language, and if that's happened, it can help a lot to the Angular team achieve their goal. Lexical scope. So in terms of lexical scope, let's start with this example. So we have this, who's doing that a lot? Exposing an enum in your class just to use it in the template, right? What's the problem? Why we need that? The problem is because lexical scope inside Angular doesn't work like the JavaScript lexical scope. If you look at that, whenever you have the name variable, if you don't have it inside the function, JavaScript will go to the upper level to look until the window level, right? And Angular works a little bit different, and the team wants to change it a little bit to extend Angular lexical scope, include JavaScript, so it's going to be more or less the same, so we don't need those kind of stuff. And again, this future slide, don't be panic, it's still stuff on the lab, stuff that Angular is just checking, but a few options that are on the table right now is functional components that going to look like that and solve these three main authoring format problems I just introduced. HTML first approach or modern class component that will help us with both TypeScript in expressions, lexical scope problem, and of course, what was the first one? Never mind. Yeah, so quickly, Angular Material introduced two new components, 2D drag and drop and time picker. That was one of the most requested features from the Angular team. New styling tab that I'm going to show that in a second, but before that, new teaming APIs. Teaming was a nightmare in Angular Material, right? But now you have a global material team function that you can use easily, but not only that. You have a specific override function for each component that can change a specific property with a simple mixin. Not only that, if you're using CSS variables, so we can have a look on that, and every component in Material have now a styling tab in the docs that you can see every property, how you can override it easily using CSS variables. I wish I knew where is my slides. Cool. I know it took more time than I had, but it was super important. I wish I could share even more stuff that's happening and was part of this amazing release. If I try to summarize it in two things, is first, what a great release it was, and what a great time to be an Angular developer it is. That's all I have for you today. Here's my contact handle. Thank you very much.
All right, all right.
And come chat with me during the day, during the breaks. Enjoy your conference. Thank you very much.